Okay, Barbara, we're live.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to be able to talk to Nelson DeMille and his son, Alex, about their second collaboration together, Bloodlines, After the Deserter. And as actually tomorrow is the publication day, I'm going to raise a little toast to you two and say, congratulations on another book published. Oh,
Thank
good. Wine for that. We're all set. Wonderful. So obviously some questions that will arise will be how you write together. But one thing I can definitely tell from the acknowledgments, this is a very big book. Notice it's like 470 some pages, 90 actually. It would be very hard, wouldn't it, Nelson, to write a book this size all by yourself?
Some of my books have been longer, to tell you the truth, and you remember them. Barbara the Panther was
I
probably
do, but I was being kind about your age.
you know, books used to be longer. They're shorter now, and they've gotten shorter. And in the Victorian era, this is before TV and radio. Of course, they were big. Uh, but you just want to tell the story. You want to tell the story, and I think this, I looked at this book when we were finished with it, and I said, "What can we take out of here?" And we did some interstitial stuff. We, tightened by the chapter, but the story was still, to make it a full story with full characterizations, which you don't see in a lot of novels today. It was what it was, and the publisher doesn't complain. So if I was a publisher, I'd complain. The cost of the book, the cost of the money, the shipping, the printing, the paper, but they didn't complain. They loved it.
Well, we're the home of Outlanders, so this is a small book from my standpoint. But what I was really thinking about, I read the acknowledgments. I always, at the end of the book, I like to read the acknowledgments and what the authors have to say. And it was clear to me that one or both of you consulted quite a few people. I mean, this is a big story set in Berlin. You've got language to, in fact, Alex, I think you thanked somebody for the language assistance, right? Get the German right.
Yeah, a good friend of mine whose mother is a native Berliner, and she also grew up in Germany. So I figured Google translates pretty good, but not good enough for a published book. So I needed to double check. And I was surprised. Especially with German. I mean, there's so many idioms and things, and the way, the declarative thing that a cop would say might be different than a non, all the different subtleties of language. So I wanted to make sure I got it right.
Well, there is also, dialects, and Berlin is not in the center of Germany. I've only been there twice, but I can remember how long a drive it was the first time that I went from, I think, Rostow up on the North Sea. It was like 8 hours across the prairie, so to speak, to Berlin. So, you have to account for that. But there's a lot of history in this book too. I mean, there's a lot of echoes of the Second World War and a lot of parallels, which I won't talk about because it will sort of spoil things. But clearly there are parallels to events that happened in Berlin almost a century ago, right?
Yeah, well, we were both history majors. I was a history major, and Alex was a history major. And Bob, you've read my books. History always creeps into the books, and there are some people who like it. Some people think it's a throwaway, but it gives the book context. It gives it some, fullness that a lot of modern novels don't have. And it was actually Alex who picked Berlin for the setting for this book. I think it was brilliant because the history there is so tragic. And I never read a happy book set in Berlin. I'm sure you didn't either. Every book that you read set in Berlin has got some tragedy involved with it. But it was a perfect setting for the book. And Alex and I had gone to Berlin when he was, I think, maybe 20 years old. I took him to Berlin. And I've been back for business a couple of times, and I just find it a fascinating place. And I never thought to put it in the book, but once Alex suggested it, I said, "Yeah, it's a good setting for a book."
Well, I think you do a great job. The echoes of the war are still there, and you talk a lot about the rebuilding. The blank spaces where the bombs came down and the way things had to be put back together. I can remember the first time I was in Germany in Hamburg. And, they practically rebuilt Hamburg because it was largely flattened. But that's not any different than the East End of London, which also the war. And it gave a chance for some of these older medieval cities to, to be reconstructed in a way that probably wouldn't have happened in the absence of the demolition of the war. But I thought, I love the way that you wandered off into architecture, that, there were echoes of Nazis. There were all kinds of things that gave it so much texture.
Thank you. Yeah, I really think the ways that politics and architecture overlap are so interesting. And you highlight a particular palace, the Imperial Palace in Berlin, that had been damaged in the war. Then it was on the communist side. They ripped it down. They built this, I think it was a pretty ugly building in its place. And then when the communist regime ended, that was ripped down and they rebuilt the palace. But now it's a museum instead of a palace. And it's this constant like reinvention, recontextualizing things that are already there, and in this way that this kind of battle and this push and pull of remember, like how to remember history and what the identity of the city is still playing out in a way I think is really interesting. Which piece of the Berlin Wall to keep, for instance, too? Do you keep the wall up? Do you tear it all down? Things like that.
When I was there first time, I think we had a guide who actually didn't know why there was a wall in Berlin. He was in his 40s. He was a Berliner. He was totally confused by what happened. And then, last time I was there, I know we stayed at the Adlon, and part of the point was to go to some of the great museums in Berlin. And I wondered to myself, how much would have been lost if the museums themselves had taken a direct hit. This is where the statue of Nefertiti is. This is where a lot of Assyria is. This is where some magnificent artworks are. And, that we were there when the palace was being or whatever it was, reconstructed, reconverted. And there was some tension about the director was going to the British Museum in the middle of the project, and they were digging up, new subway lines. And then we went to Potsdam, which you do. I don't think you actually go to Potsdam in this book, do you? No, but there's a lot of war stories about Berlin, taking down to Potsdam and the whole bit. Anyway, so tell us a bit about Scott Brody and Maggie Taylor, because they're such an interesting pair.
I'll let Alex take that.
Sure. Scott Brody and Maggie Taylor are both Army Criminal Investigation Division special agents. They are the law enforcement detective investigative arm of the Army. So any crimes involving the U.S. Army that need to be investigated is under their purview. Scott is a little bit more of a kind of hothead, shoot from the hip. Maggie is a little bit more considered, but I think that was kind of the foil we set up in The Deserter. In this book, I tried to complicate it a little bit, where you see ways in which their personalities kind of not bleed into each other, but they sort of start testing each other, and in some ways switch roles a little bit. But anyway, the two of them, not known for following proper procedure, are sent on this very difficult case to investigate the murder of one of their own agents, who's found dead in a park in Neukölln, which is like the center of the Arab refugee community in Berlin. Their hands are tied from the very beginning because they're American military agents inside of Germany. They don't have any jurisdiction. They're kind of expected to just kind of be there and rubber stamp and write a report. And of course, given who they are, that's not what they're going to do. So we sort of track them as they gradually cross lines over and over again and sort of start to find out what this murder is really about. And they start to see the truth underneath it that other people aren't willing to see.
So, wouldn't it be true that one of the great ways you can introduce conflict into stories is have all these jurisdictional disputes? And so you've got multiple agencies in this book, German and American, who are all butting heads and don't necessarily have clear-cut roles. I thought that was fascinating. Nelson, The Charm School is one of my all-time, it's my mother's possibly favorite book. I'm looking at my signed copy over here. Surely all the books you've written, conflict has been a major plot driver for you.
Yeah, and also and the John Corey books, John Corey series started with Plum Island and ended with my last book, The Maze. There's 8 books in the series. These books are a study in jurisdictional disputes and also a clash of cultures. John Corey is NYPD, wounded in the line of duty, so he's on disability, permanent disability. He's not going to go back to the police force. But he's a contract agent with the FBI within their group called the Joint Terrorist Task Force. So he is a New York cop with the typical NYPD attitudes and jargon, working with these kind of Boy Scout FBI guys. So you have clash of cultures. You also have some jurisdictional disputes, and that was kind of, I think that was kind of what drove the book. That Corey saw things more clearly. He saw things as a cop, and they were looking at things more in a more legalistic manner. Every FBI special agent, as you know, is an attorney or a CPA, so they have a legalistic mind. Corey's got he's goal oriented, they're process oriented, and we try to do a little bit of that, I think, in Bloodlines, where a lot of these people are a little bit process oriented, and you have the alphabets of agencies coming together, and everybody's protecting their turf because it was such a high profile murder with bigger implications of Islamic terrorism. People are treading lightly in some cases, but our characters come in, Brody and Taylor, and their objective is clear: find who killed our colleague, and they're not concerned about any of his other nonsense. I think that's what drives the book a little bit too, and I think the reader appreciates that.
Well, I definitely agree with you, but I think David Kim, which one of you was mostly responsible for David Kim? Because I mean, he's really so different than the typical FBI agent. He's even cooperative.
Right.
Um,
That was Alex's character.
yeah, I kind of wanted to. Yeah, David Kim is an FBI counterterrorism guy, and at first I wanted him to be one. He's one of those obstacles. But I in a way, I wanted to introduce somebody who's a slightly different kind of maverick than our typical hero, and see how that kind of just complicates. This is a complicating factor. You're seeing everybody's the hero of their own story, so bring in a supporting character who really thinks he is the hero of the story also, and that kind of gives it an extra dimension, and hopefully a feeling of kind of a little bit of realism. These are all real people, and they're representing their agencies, but everybody brings their own baggage and their own worldview to this case, and it's that kind of clash of personalities that I think drives the conflict and what makes it interesting beyond the plot.
Well, I agree with you, although it seemed to me that David Kim had perhaps, just my impression, had sort of the weakest link, reason to be there. He's from the New York field office. He is not, I wasn't entirely clear why he was there, but I thought he was great. And he ended up working, a little spoiler here, but he really works with Brody and Taylor in a way that you wouldn't expect. So, some of the people that come to that first meeting, I'm not entirely clear why they're all there. Did you, part of it, I guess, is that there just has to be kind of a, large group of characters who have a stake in what's happening.
That was the thing. This high-profile American military official is murdered in in an Arab, Muslim refugee community inside of Berlin. That alone, how many different interests are represented right there? The State Department, the FBI, the American military, the German federal police, the Berlin local police, probably some spies who aren't going to say who they are. So it's just this tapestry of people who want to see this through, or have to feel like they are involved one way or the other. I think it gives a sense of like the scale and the dimension of this thing and how important it is, and how it's not, however it shakes out, it's not just a murder. There's a lot. This is
right.
like moving.
But you're also underlining a very divisive decision by Angela Merkel, who, was a humanitarian and offered an open door basically to Middle Eastern refugees. When many Germans went along with that, but many Germans, ended up not being comfortable with it. And so there's a whole far right thing. Honest to God, Nelson, I was born in 1940, so I'm even older than you are. And I thought I'd escaped the 1930s. And suddenly here I am living in the 1930s all over again, with
well, it resonates. We are who we are, and we're doing what we're doing because of what came before, obviously. And I was born during World War II, and when I was growing up, literally, I think every man in my neighborhood, was a veteran. I think I grew up around nothing but veterans. and this is how you grow up. So, this resonates and this becomes part of you. Um, and then, if you're fortunate or unfortunate enough to become a writer, I'm not sure if it's fortunate or unfortunate, this is your history. So, right, you're taking a lot of that into the book, or trying to get into a book without forcing it into a book. But I just found, because Berlin has got this tragic history, that the physical uh, place being Berlin, and in all its different forms, part barn, part brand new, part old. There's like layers of history there. And if you live in a city like that, you regular Berliner, some of us, you're right. Some of them don't know what's going on around them. It's like this country, you could be a guide and not know what the war was about. But a lot of them, they resonate within that, that historical context. And this is what we try to bring out in the book. It's easy to write a thriller, not easy, but but to have it have different layers and different dimensions, without being too intrusive. You don't want to be preachy. You don't want to you don't want to publish your research notes, but you do want to give a full context because you respect the reader. You think the people who are coming to your book are going to, you know, appreciate what went into it and appreciate the time. And also, besides being entertained, which is number one always, you have to be really educated too, and you have to be illuminated a little bit.
So here we have in the first scene in the book anyway, we have David who is in a fancier part of Berlin. I love the way the schnapps played into that, by the way. Are you guys schnapps drinkers? I thought that was a wonderful clue to find out where he was.
I never really knew how many. To me, schnapps was always like the gross stuff that people drank in college, like that peach garbage. I didn't even know there was an entire, more sophisticated version of this stuff until I went to Europe. But yeah, it's fun to bring those little cultural things into it.
It really is. It's like going to Hungary and finding out Tokay isn't really just Mogen David in a different bottle. It's completely different. But anyway, there he is, and he's in this posh neighborhood, and he clearly is having an affair with a much younger and attractive woman called Anna. And he gets up in the middle of the night, actually early morning, like 3, 2, or whatever it is. And he takes his gun and he gets dressed. He doesn't wake her up, and off he goes. And, we're all the reader is sitting there going, what's going on? And then the next thing we find out is that he has gone to a different rendezvous, one he himself appoints, and there he's shot and killed. And even worse, somebody carves out one of his eyes. Wow.
Yeah.
So it could be anything. It could be personal. It could be political. It could be, I think you rule out robbery because, he has enough stuff on him that it doesn't appear that it was just a casual hit by some guy looking for drug money. And he's in that neighborhood, as Alex has pointed out, where it's kind of in the heart of the Arab Turkish. Is there a difference, do you think, between the Arab and the Turkish communities? I mean, I know Turks are of the same faith, but they're really quite different, aren't they?
Well, the age of the communities is very different. I mean, Turks, right, Dad? I mean, Turks came to Berlin and to Germany in the 60s, 50s, 60s, so I think that they have a different sense of, I mean, every wave of immigrants kind of looks down on the wave that comes after them, so right. I do think there's a level of resentment or even racism against new Arab immigrants from the Turks that are already living there. And I think that's always interesting too when you get to the granular level of these communities. It's not a monolith at all.
I know. I mean, I've been Istanbul's my favorite city, or it was anyway, till Erdogan largely took over. But I never really felt that Turkey was the same Arabic whatever as it was. I mean, they've always straddled Europe. Even Istanbul straddles Europe and Asia. They allied with Germany in the First World War, and I'm trying to remember, did they in the Second World War too? I can't really recall.
They were neutral, but I think they were pro-fascist.
Right. Sort of like Spain, right?
Yeah, not quite that fascist, but they certainly were.
So I don't really think of them as being all that sympathetic, with the Saudis or the people from Iraq or Iran or whatever it all is. I've always thought they were kind of a separate Arab group.
And to an outsider, when I first went to Germany 30 years ago, the Turks were already second, third generation. To me, they were indistinguishable from the Germans. The German was, a lot of them didn't even speak Turkish anymore.
Right.
Just like Italian Americans today would not speak Italian. They were kind of indistinguishable. And I didn't realize unless I saw their name that they were actually Turks, because they dressed and spoke German, second, third generation. So we bring that out in the book a little bit too, but mostly we're talking about, as you mentioned earlier, Merkel let 1 million asylum seekers in. And then there were people there who were there legitimately, they applied and they came in that way. But the German nation is not totally accepting of this, and we're showing that in the book too, the tensions that have come about. And this is a country that was prided itself on being 99.99% pure Germanic Aryan during the 30s, and now it's a country that's become a melting pot. And there are a lot of older Germans who are resentful, and apparently there are a lot of newer Germans who are resentful. They just had state elections in Bavaria and Hesse. I don't know if you saw that. The far right parties have gained
Yep.
tremendous amount of votes because people they have anxiety about foreigners coming into their country. And again, we weren't prescient because this was going on for a long time. But Alex and I think, tried to show us that within this German state that we, as Americans, look at as very efficient and very well run and very orderly, it's got a lot of fault lines in it. And that comes out in the book too, I think.
Yeah, and another major focus is the former East Germany, the Stasi secret police. And one fact that I found interesting, that was a bit of an inspiration for the story, was the largest centers of far-right neo-Nazi sympathy politically in terms of the votes and activities is in the former communist East Germany. So why is that? What is that about? Why is it that this country that was formed literally and defined itself as being anti-fascist and anti-Nazi is now, the people living there now are the kind of vanguard of the new the new German right? What are the lines connecting those things? In history, and that plays out in the book too.
I thought it was interesting when you pointed out that under the Stasi government, they were the most surveilled people possibly of all time.
It was a small country, yeah. It was a small country.
One informant for every 6 people or something, which, I always thought, based on my reading of Q Shalong and other people, that China, the neighborhoods in China with their neighborhood watches were worse, but I don't think that they were quite on that level.
I was in Cuba about 7, 8 years ago, and I wrote The Cuban Affair. And there, they did have the neighborhood watch groups too. These are, this is so, we can't even grasp what that means, that to live in a neighborhood where 2 or 3 people on your block are actually reporting to the government, and they're reporting on you. And, in the neighborhood I live in, if we're having disagreements, we'll have disagreements. We don't expect somebody to go to the government and say, and denounce us as.
No, but in Arizona, you can expect them to go to your HOA. and then it could actually feel like you're under the Stasi. Right? We had a sort of a Nazi neighborhood in our 16 home enclave here that, was really very difficult. So I know people might be interested in how you write together, but I also wanted to point out, which I thought was interesting and very charitable of you, that you list in the back 1, 2, 3, 4 people who donated to charity in order to be characters in your book. So a question I have is, when they do that, do you have to really think about what kind of character they're going to be? Could you make them, bad guys, or do they all have to be good guys, or how's that work?
Well, you make them sign a waiver. That's number one. So
I understand that.
But years ago, for charity, they used to auction off dinner with Nelson DeMille, or lunch in some cases, and it got to be a little complicated trying to come up with a lunch date, and you wind up with people, or dinner. You wind up with people you don't particularly want to have dinner with, and And with Susan Isaacs, a fellow writer, who said to me once, "Oh, Nelson, don't do that." She says, "Do what I do." And this was her idea. She got it from somebody else. She says, "You auction off character in the book, and you can make, a lot of money for the charity. And all you've got to do is put that person in the book." So I said, "Well, that sounds good." So next time I was asked if I would do dinner with Nelson, I said, "No, I have something actually better. These people will be immortalized forever and ever." And it worked. We've raised a lot of money for good charities by putting the characters in the book. But then, editorially, then you have one of my books, and I can't remember, one of the John Corey books. Just coincidentally, out of 8 people who won this prize, 4 of them were females with Italian last names. Now, all of a sudden, I have a book that don't know nothing to do with Italian Americans. So how am I going to get 4 Italian American female names in the same book? But I managed to get them in there. Editorially, it's a little bit of a problem sometimes, but if you're clever, you can always work it in. And I let Alex do it this time. I didn't feel like doing it, so Alex.
It's better to not make them serial killers unless they want to be, But outside of that, you do what you want, I think.
Well, yeah, no, I don't know whether people really have expectations of what role they will have,
Right.
but I just wondered if you had to consider that waiver or not. So, Alex, you've had a distinguished career. You're a director, film editor. You wrote The Deserter with Nelson. You've done a lot of work in film with fellowships and screenplays and so forth. How did you get sucked into writing books with your dad?
He called me and he said, "Do you want to write a book with me?" And I said, "No, thanks." And then and then he told me that how much I could he'd pay me, and I thought I'd think about it. And it was honestly it was a major, it was a bigger shift even than I realized when I said yes to it ultimately, because I was thinking, okay, obviously I'm not going to be doing what I'm doing right now. If I'm doing this is going to become all my attention and all my time. This is a big thing. But the actual creative gear shift in my head between writing screenplays and writing novels was bigger than I thought. I remember the first when I sat down to write The Deserter, looking at that blank page and thinking, "Oh, this is it. I'm not writing a blueprint for a movie, a blueprint for anything. The words that I'm writing are the thing. This is it. You got all the power and all the responsibility are on you as the writer, which is exciting, but also daunting. But once I started doing it, I thought I was pretty good, and I thought we worked together really well. We weren't sure about that at first, so we decided to do it again.
So, I mean, it's a screenplay, what on average might be 100 pages with almost all dialogue and
Right.
occasional set directions, and the actors get to fill in, and you don't have to describe landscape because it's already there and all.
Right.
And now this is a 500-page book essentially, so that's a lot more words.
Yeah, I mean, I always tended to overwrite a little bit in the screenplays because I ultimately wanted to be writing prose, and screenwriting is so constricting in a lot of ways. Yeah, you have to be very, very precise and very economical with your words. It can take a long time simply because not a single line or a single page can be, I'm not wasted, but it can't. Everything has to be doing 5 things at once. So it was nice to have that kind of broader canvas of the book.
So, Nelson, what inspired you to ask Alex to write The Deserter with you?
Well, when I was, and the business, Barbara, you've been in this business forever. I was signing a new contract with Simon and Schuster, and for a 3-book deal, you stand a 3-book deal. And they and my agent said, it would be great if you wanted to do 3 co-authored books. We'd happy to sign a separate contract for 3 co-authored books. And at first I said no. I don't play well with others. I never did. The only book I co-authored was Mayday, if you remember it.
Yeah.
It's still in print. I did it with Tom Block, who was my childhood friend. We knew each other since we were 4 years old, and the book was very successful commercially and critically, and it became a CBS TV movie of the week with. I think I can't remember who some major actor at the time. It's funny I can't remember, but so I said it was a good experience. But Tom and I would put a very big strain on the relationship, and we didn't even speak for about a year afterward. And I said, well, never again. Collaborators will be shot as far as I'm concerned. I'm never gonna never do this again. So then, fast forward 30 years, and my agents are pressuring me a little bit to do this 3-book co-author deal. And I said, nothing good could come of this. Why am I saying yes? Well, maybe it will work. Maybe I learned a lot in 30 years of how to work with other people. So anyway, I signed the deal, and we found a co-author, but not Alex. And the fellow didn't work out. It was just a lot of wasted time and effort. I want to just scrap the whole project and give the money back here. Um, but again, the editors and the agents were saying, you can make this work. We know you can make this work. Okay. So I was sitting there one night, but months had gone by, and this guy had written about like 25% of the book, and really wasn't that good. He was not a bad writer. He was actually a good writer, but he couldn't get into the characters, and I kind of almost gave up on it. And Alex tells the story, but I tell it in a different way. Maybe 10 o'clock at night, I was sitting in my lazy boy recliner, and it just struck me that I need a co-author. And I know an author, Alex DeMille, my son. Although he's not a novelist, but he's self-employed. He can do this. He can put the screenwriting aside and do this. So I called him, and I proposed this to him at night. About 10 o'clock at night, and he was going to
But he was weak, right? His defenses were down. Maybe he'd been drinking.
He didn't sound enthused. And then that's when I mentioned the number, what the publisher was offering, and Alex said, "Well, okay, let's talk," So, and that's how it came about. But it was just, it's funny. The most obvious thing didn't pop into my head, which is call my son. He's self-employed. There were other authors out there. One was dying to, be co-authors with Nelson DeMille book. But I didn't feel like starting all over again with somebody that I didn't. It's not an easy thing. If it wasn't for Alex, I don't think I would have done it again. There are a lot of authors out there, and you know them, who do have co-authors who really are writing the whole book, or have ghostwriters whose name is not even appearing on the cover, and they're not writing the book at all. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to really be a co-author, whoever I was working with. But I don't, I think being an author and being self-employed and working by myself for 40 years, there was really no way in my mind I could collaborate. Except when I thought about Alex and his future and his career and what he was bringing into it, which was A, youth, and B, good screenwriting knowledge. And screenwriters are not novelists, but they understand the story. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, the arc of the story, and plotting and pacing and all that. So everything was there. As you say, a screenplay is 100 pages, but if you learn how to fill it in, you've got a novel. There was a time back in the 70s, you probably remember, when they were taking big movies, they were taking those screenplays and turning the screenplay into a novel rather than the novel into a screenplay. And it kind of worked for a while. There were a couple of them. I just can't remember the names of them offhand, but you remember them.
Well, there were, and there are some of those franchises like Star Wars. We have an author here called Michael Stackpole who does really well, taking, like the Star Wars things and putting it into. And didn't Max Allan Collins, didn't he do that? Or was it the other way around with the book about the five brothers in the war, the name of which escapes me currently, and I sort of think it was a movie, and then he wrote it as a book, but I might be backwards.
I think they did start off as a movie, then it became, they started off as a screenplay, and then a lot of times when the movie is being made, this is back in the 70s and maybe the early 80s, while the movie is being made, the novelist took the screenplay and made that screenplay into a novel that may or may not have represented what turned out to be on the screen at that time. But they're different formats and they're different disciplines for sure. But there's something in common, which is creativity. Yeah, you can't do either if you're not creative. So once you're creative, you just have to learn. Could I do a screenplay? That's the question. And the answer is no. I've tried it. I did one or two and they were not that good. Because most screenwriters, I think, cannot become novelists. all novelists think they could write a better screenplay than any screenwriter, but that's not true either, as I found out. It's very difficult to tell a whole story in 90 to 100 pages and have it sound good and hopefully look good on the screen. So I'm not making the transition soon to screenwriting.
So, Alex, aside from the paycheck, what interested you about working with your dad, which is, potentially a dangerous thing to do, to work with?
Yeah, I mean, what if I wrote a bunch of crap? Then what happens? I don't know. I had a very clear understanding of, I thought anyway, of at least what I liked about his books and what I appreciated about them. And to be honest, I didn't read a lot of commercial thriller fiction, but I read his books and I kind of knew what set him apart, how they stood out. Sense of humor, I would say, his characters, his sense of place, the kind of really good concepts he comes up with for setting a story. And I feel like the storytelling values that he has, and partly because I was raised by him, they're very similar to the ones I have and what I've been doing. So I think just from a very fundamental level, if you're collaborating and you don't have the same taste, it's not going to work. It's never going to work. You have to like the same things and value the same things. And I think that the ways in which his books, I think, elevate the genre were always something I appreciated. And I kind of thought that would be exciting to do that with him and also bring out what I thought was the best and most compelling elements of his books and how I could be a part of that too.
This is a slightly different thing. Because very often when people collaborate, what they create is a third voice, like Preston and Child or something. It's a completely different, or Manning Coles. I don't know if you've ever read the absolutely incredible post-World War II spy stories by Manning Coles, a man and a woman, both had been in intelligence. And when one of them died, the other one just couldn't do it. Actually, Dick Francis and Mary Francis were like that. Nelson,
Right.
that.
Yes, yes.
When Mary died, she was the voice. Dick was the background. But what's interesting here is that, this is still your voice, Nelson. And, I don't know that I didn't have a sense that you created so much a third voice as a Nelson voice that, energetic and carries on. Do you feel, Alex, as though it's a different voice with you writing with Nelson?
I think it's slightly different. I think it was inevitable it would be somewhat different. I was trying to make it not too different because his name is on there and it's big. It's big on the cover there, so it needs to. It's a Nelson DeMille book,
and where it says Nelson in giant.
Yeah, I think my font is going to slowly get bigger. Maybe.
Right. Actually, one way I can tell when an author is really turning the corner, in first novels, Nelson knows this. The title is huge, and the author's name is quite small. Right. Nobody knows who it is, and it's all about the title. And then as you move on, the title shrinks and the author's name expands. But it's always like a signal from the publisher that if you flirt, you can kind of tell what's happening.
Yeah. But it was, again, like in a way, it separated me from the story. I couldn't be neurotic about it the way I am sometimes with some of the screenplays or whatever I'm working on. I'm like, I know the kind of book I'm writing, and I know I have my dad's voice in my head anyway, from growing up with him. So it kind of was an interesting process, and I guess entirely different than just setting out to write your own book, but in a way kind of fun and kind of liberating. I'm like, I know this playground that I'm going to play in, and I'm just going to have fun with it and be entertaining.
So Nelson, what was the pressure for writing a co-authored trilogy? I mean, 3 books as opposed to just writing your own book, not just, but as opposed to writing your own books. What was so appealing about 3 co-authored books?
Well, as I said, nothing. Initially, nothing. Just the idea.
I meant from the publisher's standpoint, not
from the publisher's standpoint. That's a good question. Barbara. They thought the books would come out sooner. I'm not known for my speedy turnarounds on my books, and they thought that this would, for some reason, I don't know why they thought this. They've been in the business like I have. They thought I would be able to get a book out a year if I had a co-authored book in between. But co-author means you're co-authoring, so it doesn't mean I'm ghosting it out. I'm giving it to somebody to write. The first guy I worked with, I spent hundreds of man hours, going nowhere, and it actually delayed my books. So it was my original instinct was right. Don't do this, but the world is funny. It went the way I knew it was going to go, which was badly downhill. But just that one night, I was just sitting by myself, and Alex's name popped into my head, and I said, "This is a good idea, but this could also be one of the worst ideas I've ever had." But it worked, and you just don't know. You gotta, it's like everything else. You're in business for yourself. I'm in business for myself. You gotta roll the dice. There's no paycheck at the end of the week. Somebody's not paying you just to show up. You're not civil service. You gotta roll the dice, and also you have to challenge yourself a little bit. It's easy to get complacent when you've had 25 bestsellers or whatever, and you're only as good as your last book. I always tell myself that you're only as good as your last book. I didn't mind taking the chance with the co-authored book, not to make it go faster, not to make more money, but just to maybe get a different voice in. And also, I was thinking ahead that after I put down the pen, or the pen puts me down, one or the other, that my name and books could go on. And that could have done that with any co-author. We've seen this with Vince Flynn, for instance, and others who have passed on. But with a family member, I think this is
Right.
a good thing for me to, consider. And it's going to
Well,
work.
I'm here at the center of the Cussler franchise, so Dirk will be here in November. But, I spent a lot of time with Kyle. Actually, we did an event on September 11th where Kyle Mills handed off at the store the Vince Flynn franchise to Don Bentley. And Don Bentley will be handing off the Jack Ryan Jr. franchise to an author I can't yet name, at least in public. And so there's a lot. I just talked to Brett Battles, who's taken up the Stuart Woods books, for example. And I do think for readers, not to mention, authors' estates and so forth, but I think for readers, it's a very sad thing when an author retires, forcibly or not, and then the character, goes away. And for many readers, it's really lovely to have somebody else continue, writing those characters or whatever it is. So, if you go all the way back, do you remember that epic night at the Edgars where they had the 90-minute film about the woman who wrote the Nancy Drew books? We all went out in the lobby.
Right.
Robert Parker was the grandmaster by that night.
Yeah.
He was getting totally shut out by Nancy Drew and the document. I've always remembered that. But still, I think for readers that this is a wonderful thing to be able to have life go on, with characters that they love. So,
yeah, the readers do become attached. I mean, we've all had an experience where we found a series that just spoke to us. For me, the first one was Sherlock Holmes, of course, and for a lot of people. And it would have been nice if people have continued it on long after it, but none of them authorized. It was just,
well, that was a copyright issue and a charity issue and a whole lot of stuff, right?
But it'd been nice if he had set up his estate with somebody he trusted to continue Sherlock Holmes. And with Agatha Christie, she didn't have to. She wrote till she was like, when Poirot died, the New York Times estimated that when he died, when Agatha Christie died, the obituary on the front page of the Times was not Agatha Christie, it was Poirot. It was kind of like a very clever thing. But they estimated Poirot's age at about 106 years old.
Right.
So she was there from beginning to end, but she did not set it up either But this is what more and more authors are doing. Partly for their estates, obviously, but it's partly for the readers to say this character will continue. So
yes, well, I do quite a bit of author advice, create your estate counseling as authors pass through the bookstore, because I do think it's something many people don't even think about, and especially at the outset of their careers. But there we go. So you've got one more book to go, the two of you, at least for the moment. Have you already started work on that, Alex? And are you going to a new location? Where are we going next?
I am. Yes, actually, the book's been the proposal's been approved, so I started working on it. It's going to be set at an isolated U.S. Army base in the American West, probably in the Mojave Desert or somewhere. It's basically going to be a clandestine research station for autonomous weapon systems. In other words, drones, robots, things like that,
Right.
artificial intelligence. There's a murderer on the base. They already know who the murderer is because it's one of the autonomous weapons. And the question is, who did somebody program it? Did it do it on its own? So it's kind of a closed circle mystery on this base in the middle of like the desert wastes, and Brody and Taylor have to be there. They have a set number of suspects. They have these creepy robots who are now shut down inside of a storage facility somewhere, and they have to figure out what is going on. There's lots of competing interests, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I do too. My God, we just talked about Agatha Christie, and you just discussed an Agatha Christie country.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's so funny. Well, if it's here in the West, maybe we'll get to see you in person.
That'd be great.
Absolutely wonderful. So, Patrick, do you want to pop in and see if we have questions from the audience? Because we probably do. By the way, I forgot. Whoops, stop. I forgot to say that Nelson and Alex very kindly, at least I think both of you did, have signed copies of Bloodlines for us. And we only have a handful that are not already claimed. So if you're watching this and you're, lustful for a copy, I advise you to follow the link that Patrick will put into the comments field really quickly, because they could all be gone by tomorrow morning.
That's exactly what I said. Yep. Let's see here. Yes. Okay. Another question just about the mechanics of collaborating. What makes it easier or difficult to collaborate if you aren't in the same city, area, geography?
Well, technology, thank God. I mean, my first collaboration was 1978, 79 with Tom Block when I wrote Mayday. We used to put our manuscript in the mail, if you can imagine, and wait for it to get to the other end, and there was a typewritten manuscript. Now Alex does the first draft, then he emails it to me, and I print it out so I can work on it as a printed manuscript, and I scan, and I send a scanned copy back to him. So what used to take weeks can take days now, logistically. But I mean, the MO that we use is that he does first draft. I do editing, light or heavy as it may need. I give him notes if I think something needs to be reworked. It goes back to him. I don't want to see it again. That's it. He does first draft. I do heavy editing. He does final draft. But I do read the whole thing again at the end, and we go through it one more time. And it worked. It's just like a little bit of a dance, and we figured it out. And this could not be done without email, scanning, and other electronic marvels that we didn't have 30 years ago.
I'm so glad to hear you say that you actually printed out, in the 20 years that we had Poison Pen Press. I had to print out every damn manuscript that I edited.
Right.
My mind just does not work on a screen, but
I came to appreciate that. And I also, at my dad's encouragement, I was done with the draft of the entire book, printed the whole thing out, sat on the couch with a thick stack of pages. And it really, your brain, ebooks are great, computers are great, but your brain just operates differently when you're holding paper and flipping through it. And as an author, you can sort of trick yourself into thinking you're reading somebody else's book, to give you a fresh perspective on it, Anyway, for me, that's how it worked.
That's a really interesting point, Alex. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I can see it. Patrick, more?
Yeah. So Nelson, you won't have a glimpse at the manuscript until there's the entire first draft is done?
With Alex's manuscript. No,
Yeah.
we do 4 or 5 chapters at a time.
I see.
I don't go back. I'm just going forward. And then at the end, when he's finished, that's when we both read it again at the same time. And I'm happy to hear that he reads the paper version rather than the screen version. And we both make our notes on the final. Each of us has a semi-final manuscript, and I give him mine, and he takes his, and we kind of fuse it into one hopefully final.
This also depends on the chapter. I'd say there's probably 2 or 3 chapters of this book that ended up going back and forth a bunch of times because they were particularly challenging, or I wouldn't say I wrote myself into the corner, but I would say there's something about this scene that is working, and there's something that I can't put my finger on that doesn't feel right. And then he could kind of immediately pick up on it, and then we would sort of work it through. But the average chapter definitely, as he was saying, did it that way.
So when you hit send, though, it's still going to go to an editor at Scribner, or is this one Simon? Yeah, it is Scribner, which is part of Simon and Schuster. Sorry, there is a distinction. And then you get notes from the editor at Scribner.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
every if the editors have gotten a hold of the 10 commandments, it'd be 7 commandments now. They've got to do what they've got to do, and they do bring a fresh eye to it and a different perspective. We happen to have a good editor right now. Well, I've been blessed with good editors, let's put it like that. Light editing is just what you need. Clever editing sometimes. But there are, we had some issues, and I think you and I spoke about the issues I had with the maze. Some of them had to do with political correctness. My characters, far from politically correct, and a lot of the junior editors at Simon and Schuster were having difficulties with this, and they wanted me to make some changes, which I did not. And so you get that kind of editing. You don't mind creative editing. If somebody has something clever, I'm happy to, like break the chapter here or take this line out because it gives away too much and use it later. This is clever editing. But when it becomes political or cultural, then I'm saying, whoa. Last time I checked, we still had a constitution in this country, and I could write what I want.
Yeah,
that was a little jarring.
Unfortunately, I think publishing has been seized at the moment with it's a desire to avoid flash mobs and the kind of stuff that we got. You and I, as you know, were bonded in the Linda Fairstein moment. And we got hit by a real flash mob who went back through all our social media and everything and just did their best to make life miserable. And so I can see that in publishing, I ignored them all. I just took it down, put it back up again, and carried on. But I could see that it could be a real, if nothing else, huge time waster for a publisher if they were constantly having to deal with that.
Yeah, it's a little chilling too, but it's a moment in time that I think we'll look back on, and
I hope it's going to be like McCarthy and just kind of quietly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, at least I hope.
Because we're all intelligent people in this business. This is not some crazy business. This is not TV. This is publishing and book selling, and eventually, rational people will come to rational choices, and the PC stuff will pass. I see it passing already. That's why I see the pendulum swinging back.
I hope you're right. I truly do. I mean, it's fiction. I think that people writing fiction are allowed to make up whatever they want. Anyway, Patrick, back to you.
Well, Ron points out he really admires the sense of humor that is in your books, Nelson, and he was wondering if you and Alex share a sense of the same kind of sense of humor.
No, it's kind of generational. Some of it, yes. I grew up, at a different time, and which I should say is one of the strengths of these co-authored books is Alex is bringing in a younger voice, and some of the humor that he uses is younger humor. It's funny, but I know it's funny because it looks like it's supposed to be funny. No, just kidding. I can tell that when he's being lighthearted and when he's being a little bit funny and when he's writing, my stuff is maybe a little bit more direct. Some of the humor we share, but I think Alex has listened to my humor since he was a baby, so probably some of it is seeped in.
It's in there whether I like it or not. So
right, exactly.
Alex, do you have a favorite of your father's books?
The Charm School, definitely. As a I mean, as a history buff and a Cold War history buff and Russian history buff, especially, I also just think that the plot is
Amazing.
the way it's the whole book is put together.
I've
Also,
told Nelson this before, but you know, for many years, especially before Kindle, when we had a smaller store on the main drag in the art district in Scottsdale, people would shriek to a halt in a taxi or something in front of the bookstore, dash in the door, and they would say, "Quick, sell me an airplane book." So we kept the Charm School on the counter. And
Okay,
we
thank you.
just doled it out, you know, to people
Thank
as they
you.
went by. And that went on, you know, really up until Kindle came along and airplane movies and the whole bit. You know,
Yeah.
we don't get too many requests. Do we get requests anymore, Patrick, for airplane books? You're on the counter more than I am, so you might know.
Yeah, from time to time. Yeah, someone that's just in for a few minutes and, you know, definitely.
And an airplane book says, you know, a particular thing, I think, which is very much the kind of books that you write.
Yeah.
Fast
Well, they're
paced.
long. It has to be a long airplane ride, I think. Because
Well, but it's exciting, it's gripping, it takes you away from, you know, if you're a nervous flyer, you know, if you're in the Charm School, it just all goes away. It's great.
the Lions game starts off with a scene that's if you're on board an air or
Not good. No, I understand.
Yeah, airline disaster novels are not good to read on an airplane. No.
that's my favorite Corey book to finish the question, the Lions game, I'd say too.
Lions game, yeah.
I'm sorry, Alex, I interrupted you. My apologies.
Oh, no, you didn't interrupt me. I'd answer it. I just, you know, felt like giving a second answer to plug a Corey book while we're at it.
Nelson, I just have a quick question for you about Plum Island. I imagine that's a book that you still get lots of feedback and people getting in touch with you all the time. Is that still the case?
Oh yeah, and it was the beginning of the Corey series. It was meant to be a standalone book. I've mentioned this a number of times. I never did a series before Plum Island, before the Corey series. This Plum Island is another book, you know, another standalone. I'd done 7 books before that, all standalones. But the readers overwhelmingly responded to this John Corey character. I was onto something else by the time the book was published, and the fan mail started coming in about John Corey, John Corey, John Corey, and women loved the guy and they wanted to sleep with him and whatever, and guys wanted to have a beer with him. So, you know, I'm not stupid. I figured, let's do another, and Agent was very much behind it, and so was the publisher. And that's how the series got started. And but these were old ideas I had. The book is set on Long Island. I won't give away too much of it, but it has to do with Captain Kidd's treasure, and it has to do with Plum Island, which is a animal research center, which is at one time was a biological warfare research center. So these 2 different themes: Captain Kidd's treasure, which was buried on Long Island, and Plum Island, which is the animal research center. And I put the 2 ideas together, and because I live here, I kind of didn't have to do much research, and it's kind of a book. Some authors say this book wrote itself. No, they don't write themselves. Unfortunately, I wish they did, but it was an easy book for me to write, and I was having fun with it. And I always say, if the author's having fun, the reader's going to have fun. One of the easiest books I wrote, and it became, like, I think maybe the biggest seller of all my books.
What about Upcountry? I have to ask about Upcountry. That you still have lots of veterans getting in touch with you all the time?
Yeah, Upcountry was a moving book to a lot of veterans. I only did 2 Vietnam books. I was in Vietnam. I did Word of Honor, which was made into a TNT TV movie, and I didn't really want to do another. I didn't want to be the Vietnam writer, but I did have another story to tell, and that was Upcountry, and that was written long after the war. But you know, they got tremendous amount of well, a lot of letters that were very moving. You know, people wrote to me through my website, and maybe the most moving letters I've had to do with Upcountry. People, brought a lot of veterans back to Vietnam, and so that was good. I'm glad I did it. It was a little bit cathartic to me, and it was the second and probably the last Vietnam book I would write. I think we're done with Vietnam, hopefully.
Let's see. Any other film or TV projects kind of in the pipeline?
The whole Corey series is because of the writer's strike, nobody was talking for a while, but it looks like the Corey series may be picked up by one of the networks. And it actually had been picked up a few times, had been optioned, but we're working on another option. A lot of people want to do the Corey series, but they don't not quite sure how to do it, I think. And then Charm School, old Cold War thriller, is with a major producer, and that's in the works right now. They're looking to do a screenplay on that. Those are the two that I know that are active, and Gold Coast has been perennial for the last 25 years. It's owned by an entity that has been trying to get it made for 25 years. We're trying to get the rights back. Dealing with Hollywood or dealing with TV land is not the easiest thing I've ever done. But I had good luck with General's Daughter. If you saw that movie, it was John Travolta, Madeline Stowe. That was a good movie. That was the only major motion picture I ever had. And I had the two TV, Mayday and Word of Honor. So, we'll see what happens. Now that the strike
I
is
would love to
over.
see this one as a movie. I think it'd be expensive to make because they'd clearly have to go to Berlin to make it. I don't think, you could
No.
pick it all up, but
Well, we're trying to sell that series, as a series too.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. And
well, maybe Alex has connections.
yeah, more connections than I have in Hollywood.
Well,
What else?
I mean, now that the writer's strike is settled, I think there are a lot of projects that may move forward. But I've also read that there may be fewer projects that get green lighted because of the nature of the terms and various other things. So it'll be interesting to see.
Okay,
Certainly, COVID was the actual, the pandemic was an actual heyday for streaming, and now it may be dissipating slightly. But I haven't noticed that book sales have fallen off since COVID went away. And Patrick and I talk about the sale of classics at the store is just astonishing, which really started heavily during COVID, but it doesn't show any sign of dying away, which I think means there are new readers, who want to read. And I'm not just talking in crime, I'm talking all across the board. People read seminal work now. It's great.
That's great.
Yeah, most writers will tell you that they saw their backlist sales go up during COVID.
Yeah.
Mine, it was kind of, I kind of like subconsciously knew people were reading more. Well, when I saw my first royalty statement during COVID, and I looked at it twice because this was more money than these books had made in other 6-month periods. They've always done well. The backlist always does well. But this did incredibly well, and because of COVID. And you're right, because people got the reading habit, and they haven't given up the reading habit. This has continued forward, and I'm still seeing increase in my own little world of my backlist. And I think it's good if you get people away from TV or get them away from their cell phones for a while. Sit down and read a book. It's
Audiobooks have made a huge comeback too, haven't they?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't mention it. Yeah, the audiobooks are actually doing percentage-wise, I think, better, than ebooks percentage-wise in terms of growth. So yeah, people listening to audios now.
I think it's in part because it frees you up to do other things. You can still hear the story, but you can be knitting or driving or gardening or riding on the subway or various things that would be a little more challenging, or in fact, some cases impossible to be holding a book and reading it.
Right.
I think it's great. The New York Times, I noticed the Sunday Book Review had this rave about Meryl Streep reading Tom Lake, and the implication, although it wasn't quite that blatant, was that it was way better to listen to it than to read it.
Interesting, yeah. Well, before there were books, there were, the oral tradition of storytelling around the campfire and prehistoric men. And, the Iliad and the Odyssey were obviously, were oral before they were written. I think going back to it in a way, especially if you have a good narrator, I enjoy audiobooks. I don't always have the time, to sit and read. I would like to have more time to sit and read. but I do have the time when I'm in my car for audio, and I don't do my cell phone while I'm in the car. So the audio is, and I don't listen to a lot of radio, so the audio is a good way to get the books. I do a lot of nonfiction. I have to do it because I do a lot of research too. But when I do fiction and I do audio, if the narrator is good, I'm engrossed in the book, and I'm not the only person who said they pull into a parking lot and knock it out of the car because they're still listening to the book, which I think is a good sign.
How about you, Alex? Are you an audiobook listener too?
I'm a big podcast listener, so I think that's gotten me into the habit of reading. I mean, I've just like really just taking in and enjoying the audio storytelling format. I mean, some original stuff. I used to listen to audiobooks when I was younger, and I actually have like really good memories of that. So now this conversation is making me think I should get back into it. I don't know, but I do. I like. I mean, I like reading. I like reading books and going at my pace, but I think it's a great format, and I'm glad it's having something of a comeback.
Yeah, I think podcasting, I mean, I'm a child of the radio era, and I think podcasts are just basically taking us back to old time radio, Lux Radio Theater, Suspense. Remember Nelson with the door?
Yeah, right.
As a kid, I would lie in bed with the covers over my head, hoping my parents couldn't hear the radio. And, it was so great. All right, Patrick, anything else, or we kind of come to the end here?
I think that's about it. There's just some really nice comments. As much as I love the John Corey books, Paul Brenner and Cynthia Sunhill are two of my favorite characters. You just have a lot of love out here on the airwaves.
That's good.
A lot of nice comments.
Great. Well, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. I'm so glad that I got a chance. We've had a chance to talk to both of you. I want to thank you for this perfectly wonderful book, which I have devoured. For all kinds of reasons. Love the history, love the geography, love the characters, love the story. Took me a place I wasn't really expecting. So great job, guys. Did really well. If it turns out that demand exceeds our supply, could we send you more?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay. Because I have a feeling that I under-ordered. So,
I'm gonna send you,
I don't do very often, but every once in a while it does happen. So I will let you know at the end of the week and all. But anyway, many congratulations to you. I know tomorrow's your publication day, so
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You bet. It was really a pleasure. Talk to you soon.